My name is Charlie Wayman.
Okay.
I am the park ranger and volunteer coordinator for the Virginia Key Beach Park Trust. So a lot of my duties are kind of normally bringing volunteers in to kind of help with low impact sustainable projects. Sorry, low footprint, not low impact sustainable projects like beach cleanups and exotic removal, as well as talking about the park, educating about the park, and making sure everybody's having a good time. So we're kind of going to get started. So we're going to start with a little bit of Miami history, because this park actually has a really great connection to Miami, the founding of this city of Miami. So the oldest community in Miami was actually Coconut Grove. Coconut Grove was a community that was mainly inhabited by Bahamians. So pretty much the oldest modern community in this area were the Bahamians. This was really at a time that was a little bit before the North Americans that would be coming in. Of course, the original First Nations peoples that were here were the Tequesta and the Seminoles. So got to give them a shout out as the First Nations that were in this area. But the city of Miami was founded in 1896. It was founded by a woman named Julia Tuttle. Julia Tuttle's got a fantastic claim to fame that she is the only female founder of a major American city. So New York, LA, Chicago, they got nothing on Miami in that sense, because all of those were male founders. And here in 1896, almost over 20 years before women could even vote, there was a female founder. But she realized that she needed to figure out a way to modernize Miami. At this time, it was basically Everglades and swampland and alligators and mosquitoes. And what she decided to do was to hire a railway tycoon named Henry Flagler. Henry Flagler obviously has the famous Flagler Street that we have here in Miami, which is our x-axis street. Henry Flagler built a railway between the north, Miami, and eventually Key West. Henry Flagler himself did not work on the railway. He's the big boss, he's the tycoon, but he had to employ railway workers, which is a very tough job, especially given the hot, humid, mosquito-ridden and poisonous snake and alligator kind of conditions that we had down here in South Florida. So at the time, the U.S. was undergoing something called segregation. Because of the color of your skin, you were divided essentially into two classes, a first class and a second class citizen. Second class citizen means you had less rights and less freedoms than the first class. The first class were folks that definitely had lighter skin. They were Caucasian. Basically, the darker your skin was, the higher chance you were going to be in that second class. So it wasn't just, what you see on TV, certain restaurants and certain places you could go to. It wasn't only that. It was also your working wages. Legally, in the United States, you can just pay a person of color next to nothing. Basically enough that it doesn't count as slavery in order for them to do the work. And that's what Mr. Flagler did. He employed dozens of Bahamian and African American railway workers and former slaves and first generation African Americans to build this railway. He didn't get any from the north because of the conditions. He got folks mainly that originated from the south, that's the Bahamian community.
So that's the question. Did he pay them next to nothing?
I would say, yeah, basically enough to not be considered a slave, because at the time slavery was abolished at this point in the 1890s, 1900s. So essentially these folks got paid cents on the dollar, essentially. But this also included benefits. Nowadays we have things like healthcare, we have things like Social Security, which is going away, but Social Security, and we have all these benefits. But at the time there wasn't any benefits for these people, for these workers. They didn't even have a roof to sleep under. So because of that, sleeping under the stars, especially in an area where there's no AC and no mosquito spray or anything like that, the conditions were not as glamorous as sleeping under the stars sounds. There was one man in particular who decided to really kind of make a change, and he kind of had an eye for real estate. He's one of the early real estate developers in Miami. He came from Atlanta, Georgia, worked on as a carpenter on Flagler's Railway, and he decided to save whatever he could, and he decided to buy land in what is now from historic Overtown to around the Pembroke Pines area, and made that housing for these railway workers. He became Miami's first black millionaire, Dana Dorsey.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that part. Okay.
So why don't we take a walk?
All right. Awesome.
Okay, so Dana Dorsey, Miami's first black millionaire. Dana Dorsey was also quite a philanthropist in the city. He had really high beliefs in things like education for the Miami's growing black community. Dana Dorsey did have Bahamian origin, but he originated out of Atlanta. And he came down here. Like I mentioned, he bought land and made affordable housing. What a concept, affordable housing for the railway workers initially. Now, if you're a Miamian and you are, you're looking to build a house, $1 million back in the day is probably around $40 to $50 million now. With $40 or $50 million, you're going to build a house, right? Well, in Miami, you really only had two options in terms of location. You had the Everglades and the swamplands with the alligators and the mosquitoes, or you also have the breezy tropical island.
May I ask you a question? Okay, now, Mr. Dorsey, did he have this housing for only blacks, or was it for whites and blacks, or all races?
So primarily his housing was for the black community, and it was for the railway workers, which were 90%, except for the foremans, of course, at the time. But 90% of them were people of color.
So some of the railway workers were white as well. That housing.
Yes, a lot of kind of more the supervisors and the foremans and things like that. They were the ones that were in charge.
Okay.
Definitely the main laborers.
The main white laborers for sure got housing from Dorsey.
That I do not know.
Okay.
But I do know that for the black laborers,
For sure.
and most of his philanthropic things were in historic Overtown, which at the time was called Colored Town.
Okay. I'm sorry. Okay.
No, don't be sorry.
Right.
Don't be sorry. Questions are a good thing.
Yes.
So, in a very Miami fashion, he decided to build a house on a tropical island.
Okay.
He built it on an island just north of here. Mr. Dana Dorsey decided to, build his house on there. It was his own island. And he bought the island in 1918. Something he noticed, though, is that he really couldn't go to Miami Beach at the time. Miami Beach wasn't really that developed. He couldn't go to Crandon Beach. He couldn't go to some of the other beaches in the area. The main reason why is because of the color of his skin. Something in Miami is there was not a single beach, even though there's hundreds of beaches in this general area, not a single beach were for Miami's communities of color. So what he decided to do is he decided to open the southwest portion of this island and open it up, since it's his property, and make it an unofficial beach for Miami's communities of color. And of course, everybody's overjoyed. There's actually a place they could recreate. They just needed some sort of boat or watercraft to get there. But the Miami-Dade County didn't like this, and they actually forced him to sell the land. They said part of the reason they said is because it wasn't being paid for, because beaches are public and it's paid by taxpayers. But the real reason is because they wanted to sell the land eventually to a guy named Carl Fisher. Carl Fisher is definitely credited for the founding and really making the Barrier Reef Island of Miami Beach into what it is today, Art Deco, all of that kind of stuff. But that was the real reason, and that is the origin story of what is now Fisher Island. Fisher Island nowadays is the United States' richest zip code, and the average worth of a resident of Fisher Island is $3 million. So that's kind of where that island ended up. But even though Dorsey only had the island for a year, the community only had a beach for a year, the concept resonated within the community. Now, let's take a little bit of a walk. We're going to fast forward a little bit to World War II, particularly in France and in Europe.